we're facing the fact that we've done cost-benefit analysis and looked only at the benefits, not looked at the costs. The whole carbon bubble, the carbon moment in human history, is one great big gaspillage of a resource with no cost accounted for in terms of its impact on a global functioning ecosystem. If those costs were internalized, you'd be paying $57 a gallon for gas, right? So, yeah, we got to get the metrics straight, but we also just have to move off of carbon. Not because it's becoming more scarce. A few years ago, we used to think, and on one of the graphs I used, it was the peak oil question that was the great anxiety. We're going to run out of the stuff. Well, in fact, we're not going to run out of fossil fuels in any known future, especially with the new technologies used in fracking and the like. It's not the scarcity of the material, it's the impact of the material. We can't survive using that amount of carbon. Just on the post-Columbian city basis. Post-Columbian cities are those that were put in place after Columbus discovered, as it were, the New World. He didn't discover it because it wasn't lost, right? But in any case, the post-Columbian city was put in place, pretty much, at sea level. Because that's how he got here, right? On a boat. The post-Columbian city is under challenge. If you didn't see the graphic here, 1,400 cities in the United States alone. We can't survive in those cities with the combustion of terrestrial carbon. This is why the new movement that's emerging is called the carbon underground. We're trying to keep the carbon underground. And you start doing the metric for that, you measure progress in a very different way. Not how much carbon have you used, but how much have you sequestered? How much have you prevented from being used? Second point about other alternative energies, use the renewable ones. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that nuclear is a solution to anything. If you want to look at externalized costs, think about the tens of thousands of years of the waste products that you have to deal with. We don't even have human languages that have persisted long enough to label the stuff. Right? There used to be a department within the DoD, the Department of Defense in the United States, which is actually trying to think of symbol systems to put on nuclear waste dumps so that people would know after a nuclear exchange had occurred to stay away from this material because it was lethal, because the languages wouldn't be around anymore, right? We can't cope with the downstream impact of nuclear, let alone the downstream impact of carbon. So don't think nuclear is the solution to this. What you got to do is run the whole thing on the solar throughput. Now that means water, wind, tidal, micro, hydro, and the like. That is, hydro is a function of the water cycle, and you're placing yourself back into a solar-driven system. But the only, see, we've got the thing 180 degrees around. We think we live on a planet with infinite resources and finite energy. We're struggling over to control that finite energy. In fact, in America, it's so absurd. We think that the world doesn't quite get it. That's our oil in the Middle East, right? It's just a geologic mistake it's in the Middle East. But it's our oil. And we spend a few $1 billion a day sort of making sure the world understands that. It's our oil. We're on the wrong metaphor in the sense that it's not infinite energy that we have moved to, and we need to. The infinite throughput of solar energy. We're thinking we've got finite energy and infinite resources, whereas in fact we have finite resources and infinite energy. So this isn't just a slight correction in metric here and there. It's a compass question. Are we going in the right direction? Not, are we becoming more efficient in the direction in which we're going? All you'll do with that is sort of make extinction more efficient, which really isn't the goal.
Thank you very much.
Belief systems?
Well, I
the problem is that most of us in academia, and in fact in political parties, are arguing back and forth on the basis of knowledge systems, what we know. And we're trying to we come in with wheelbarrows full of evidence, you know, and sort of try to stack it up in some sense. And the trouble is that people don't behave on what they know. They behave on the basis of what they believe. And what they believe is quite different from what they know, especially when they're under stress. Now, this is not unique to America. It's not unique to elective democracy. It's not unique to Western industrial nations. It's not unique to any known civilization. It's a common pattern. People, when under stress, act on beliefs, not on knowledge. How can you get to a new set of beliefs? Don't bother worrying about whether you're going to get the right guy elected or not. The question is whether the premise of the election is going to move in the right direction. And that's, it seems to me, very hard to do. Not a cheerleading proposition. It has to do with the question, do we have the power to change our minds? In fact, it's not a trivial issue. Many of our biggest heroes in this country have sustained themselves and brought themselves to power on imagery that's totally nonsensical, including the new frontier. Remember Kennedy's big notion that we're going to have a new frontier and we're going to go off to the moon. Well, we got a guy now who's way beyond the moon and wanting to weaponize space in some sense. This notion of a linear progress off a sphere makes no sense. There's no such thing as a linear transition off a sphere, right? The basic metaphor is wrong. The idea in economics of continuous growth on a finite planet makes no sense. Try to change the minds of people in power on the issue of growth economics. Find a candidate who will stand up and say, vote for me, I can promise you no growth. Right? You laugh at it because it's laughable. We've grown up in a culture that thinks exponential growth is normal. It's not. And it won't be. Can't happen, won't happen. You need some sober talk from people like 15-year-old Swedish schoolgirls to say, listen, we're in this way beyond the institutions we've inherited or could possibly create. We've got to learn languages fast. And we've got to learn that, yes, we've got a racial problem on Earth. It's the human race. We've got to start embracing each other fast.
Want to say something about that?
Sure. And I spent most of my field work in mud huts working on techniques of agriculture that were considered pre-capitalist. But in fact, they were ecologically sustainable, had been for thousands of years. That's what's been blown away by petro-intensive agriculture. I'm glad to hear, Mr. Williams, that you're engaged in sustainable agriculture, because in most cases, we aren't in America. We have an absolutely unsustainable system in America, and I fear, through the international agencies, we're promoting that abroad. We're moving from what used to be a solar sustainable system to a petro-intensive system, to such an extent that 9 calories out of every 10 that you're consuming are subsidized by fossil fuels. If you try and test that out, you can go into any local organic store here and buy some carrots. See where they're grown. They're grown on irrigated land in California, put in a truck, refrigerated truck, and transported for 3,000 miles to this part of the country. Now, the ecological cost of that carrot, even if it's organic, is absolutely irrational. It has nothing to do with the ecological price that we're paying collectively for the disaster involved in it. Now, to move to a solar sustainable agriculture will not be trivial, especially because of the crisis of population growth. What's happening now, and you're seeing it as a drum roll around the world, we've got to come up with more and more food for more and more people in less and less time on smaller and smaller acreage. What's the answer? They have it for you already, the corporate world. Let's move from the green revolution to the gene revolution. right? We can bugger the genes and have them produce twice as much on the same area unit. Look at the energetics of that. That is, how much energy is poured into it as opposed to how much comes out in the calories that you eat. It's a sink. It has been proved again and again in human history that cultures that get into an energy sink, whether it's the Roman Empire and the Carthaginians or anyone else since, that puts more energy in extracting the food than there is in the food itself, is caught in a gurgle, an energy sink that is going down fast. So agriculture could be, properly conceived, our one big hope in sequestering carbon. Because what do plants do? They take CO2 out of the air, right? Try to keep that carbon in the ground, underground, plow it back. Get soils to absorb carbon, not release it now as trucks and tractors and fertilizer and everything else is produced on top of them, killing the life of the soil and releasing both CO2 and methane, right? If you look at the structure of meat production in any country in the world, it's a net carbon emitter, right? So you are onto the biggest hope we've got as a collectivity, moving from petro-intensive agriculture toward a solar sustainable agriculture. It's only been 70 years since we moved it from solar sustainable to petro-intensive. And we gave the guy a Nobel Prize who did it, right? Norman Borlaug got the Nobel Prize for the Green Revolution. What's the Green Revolution? It's a massive subsidy of fossil fuels into a natural ecosystemic process of capturing carbon. And it's turned itself into a release of carbon. Big mistake. He got a Nobel Prize for it. There are a lot of big mistakes like that, including nuclear down the way as well. So don't get distracted from the issue, which is to take carbon out of the atmosphere, keep it underground, join the carbon underground, get onto there are no institutions teaching this, by the way. You have to, in effect, construct your own university at this point, and you can do it, because most of you can speak English pretty well. Fortunately, for reasons having to do with the legacy of the British Empire of the 19th century, that is the language where you can exchange these things. Even in China, I'm teaching now online courses to Shanghai, Beijing, and Hong Kong on a regular basis because we're reaching over all institutions, all accredited universities and the like, all nationalities, because they know English in China. Move toward solar sustainable agriculture. You're on the right track.
Thank you, Tim. Plant material. I'd like to jump to the question that was over here. Just generalize it a bit and in very short answers from the panelists, if you have any, of what are the causes of global warming? The global warming that we see since 1975. Anybody want to hit that for 1 minute or less?
Sure.
Okay.
You want us to?
Yeah,
Sure.
if you want.
Well, the causes are the heat imbalance. That is, we're getting more heat than is escaping. The reason why it's not escaping is that we've covered ourselves with a blanket of gases, CO2 among them, but methane another one, that is keeping the heat like a blanket in the system. Can we cut it fast enough? No. It's already too late to stop this process. Question is what you're going to do in reference to the social dislocation that's already becoming manifest. Tens of millions of people live within 2 meters of sea level. Sea level is rising faster than any of them are going to be able to get out of the way because their governments don't even realize it's a problem, right? When you get tens of millions of people losing their habitation, losing their fresh water supply, and in places like Bangladesh, losing their food productivity, you're going to have a major problem within decades before any negotiations can ever take effect or we can sit down and reason about this. This social dislocation is going to so transcend any existing institution because when they're under pressure, they do exactly the wrong thing. What do? They retreat. They suggest we should build walls. Things like that, you know, not the solution.
Jim, you want to give a 2-minute wrap-up?
Well, similarly, I would urge you all to get engaged and start where you are. Don't pretend it'll be better when you get the degree, or that you can, in effect, postpone your action until you're a little older or something like that. Basically, we've got a mentality that collectively is not very helpful at this point, and we've got to realize that we're not going to make it at all unless we all make it. And that means a radically new understanding of human community that transcends everything that's being put in front of you as something to be attractive and pay allegiance to. Nationalities have got to go. Tribalisms of all sorts have got to go, and you've got to figure out the mechanisms for doing that, most convincingly from your own circumstance. No one else is going to give you a prescription for this. But it seems to me that you have a sense of urgency and vision about this that transcends those of us who grew up in the opulent moment after World War II, the baby boomers like me, right? We were seduced by the notion of continuous growth. We think that a positive move on the stock market is actually a good idea. They play nice music behind the reporting of it every night on NPR, right? It's not true. You're being sold a lot of malarkey. And don't get caught in the efficiency question. Whether or not we can come up with more efficiency in our automobiles and the like, it will be true. But that carbon goes right back into the atmosphere, no matter how efficient you make the cow dung, right? Question is, where is it residing? Are you working on fixing carbon where it should be underground, or are you working on releasing it?